all my junk.
We're live now, ladies, so welcome everybody that's tuning in with us today. I'd like to first of all introduce Fenella J. Miller and Erin Littican, who are joining us tonight to talk about how we do our research for our historical and saga novels. So Fenella has written over 80 books, but I'd just like Fenella to introduce herself and tell us about her latest book, please.
By latest, do you mean the one that's just come out, the one that's about to come out, or the one that I'm writing?
Are they all in the same series, Fenella?
Yes, it's all part of the Goodwill House series. Yeah.
Oh, well, it'd be nice if you could tell us about the Goodwill House series.
Yeah, well, that's set in an imaginary house, obviously, but in a real location, in that it's next to Manston Air Base, which was an actual base, and it's next to Ramsgate, which obviously is a real town in Kent. And it's basically a story of the owner of the house, Lady Harcourt, and the various people who come and live in her house, because she takes in boarders, because initially because she's short of money, and then because she's doing her bit for the war effort. And that sort of the stories follow her and the girls that come and board in her house. So we've had, the first book was her and her daughter. The second book is, I'm trying to think, what was the second book is a WAF, one of the WAF. The third book is a WAF girl. The one I'm writing now is the first of 3 Land Girl books.
So that's a different series altogether.
Well, no, it's all Goodwill House, because the Goodwill House is sort of the main base, the link, and then there's the girls that live in the house who board in the house, and I had WAFs there first, and then it's now Land Girls.
That's wonderful. Erin, could you tell us a little bit about, I know it's your debut novel, The Memory Keeper of, is it Kiev?
Kiev, yes.
Kiev. I only know that because unfortunately it's in the news, but could you tell us what inspired your debut novel, please?
Sure, yeah. When I was growing up, my Ukrainian great-grandmother lived with us. And so I grew up listening to stories about their life in Ukraine and how they escaped during World War II as the Eastern Front approached and the fighting got closer. So those stories just fascinated me. And as I got older, I started researching, trying to figure out how my family fit into the history, how those stories fit into the history. And the further I went back, the more I found out, and I came across more information about the Holodomor, which was a huge man-made terror famine that Stalin implemented in Ukraine in the 1930s that killed, they roughly estimate 4 million Ukrainians, starved them to death. So with that, I'd always wanted to write a story or novel about my family's experiences, but when I found the Holodomor, I wanted to start there and go back a little further. And so my next book coming out next year will actually pull more from my family's journey from Ukraine as they became refugees. And this book, The Memory Keeper of Kiev, is about a family trying to survive the Holodomor. And then generations later, that woman who tried to survive, her granddaughter helping her grandmother rediscover that history to try and help them both heal as they grieve through their various losses.
Sounds fascinating and very topical. You know, it's an old story, but it's a new story as well, unfortunately.
Yes.
My books, The Variety Girls, are set in the theatres in my seaside town where I was born, and they're inspired by my own experience, but that of my husband, because he was a variety entertainer, as was his father. And when I used to work backstage at Cleethorpes Pier, I was always reading biographies of old comedians and variety entertainers. So I would go to the library, and whichever I could get hold of, that's what I would read in between my cues. Mm-hmm. So there was entertainers like George Burns, Jimmy Jewell, Jimmy Durante, anything that, you know, I trot off to the library, and if the book was on the shelf, that's what I'd read. So I've always been fascinated by the old variety entertainers and the difference between how they step out onto the stage and become somebody else entirely. It's a transformation that fascinates me. So that's what inspired my novels. So Erin, we know that your family history inspired your novels. So Fenella, what inspired you to do a particular take on Goodwill House?
The well, not family things, although my stepfather and father were both in the RAF, which obviously has given me an interest in it. But I'd written already 7 books for another publisher, on, sort of on themes of RAF and WAFs and that sort of thing. So I was already and I'd written how many? I think 5 books or 6 books, 7, 8 books of my own set in various World War II. And it's always the RAF and it's always fighter pilots, because somehow I can't quite think it heroic to drop bombs on civilians. I know, I suppose eventually I might have a bomber pilot as a hero, but somehow fighting another fighter pilot or fighting another combatant doesn't seem quite so unheroic. So it's really my interests rather than, I've read lots of books on the subject, autobiographies, fiction, and rather than anything to do with my family. So I have 2 books actually which are family based, which are not published by Boldwood, which are called Victoria's War, and they're based. That was through my mother, who was the daughter of a Raja in India. So, and she'd written her memoirs, and I used her memoirs and sort of then put obviously different people into her situation. So that was a very personal. That is the only one that actually is personal.
It is. I think we all weave our personal experience or our personal family histories in some way into it. Yeah. And Erin, how did you go about your research? What was your starting point when you began the Memory Keeper of Kiev?
Definitely archives. When I start researching, I like to start with some nonfiction books to get kind of a framework of the history and what happened. And from there, I like to go into archives and find firsthand accounts and find people who actually lived it, saw it, and try it. And you find so much inspiration there, and it really gives you a feel of the emotion and what happened and what people went through. And so I use that 2-pronged attack when I try and do my research. And I also use a lot of scholarly journals. Online museums will have a lot of, which has been really helpful because with everything going on in Ukraine and with COVID, I have not been able to travel there. So there's been a lot of help with the online museums that I've been able to find stuff that way too.
Yeah.
I don't know how people manage really. You think, obviously I use books because I don't know about you, I prefer an actual book, autobiography, and so I can put little post-its in with what's in them. I find it, but I also, if I want a sudden bit of information I don't know, then you just got the internet, haven't you? Just Google it in, as long as you get your phrasing right. I mean, somebody said I've got more bookmarks. I must have 200 bookmarks, because every time I find something online that I think might be good, I bookmark it just in case I need popular songs of 1940 or what the weather was like in 1943. I mean, people just didn't have that, even 20 years ago.
It makes me wonder how people did research. It was obviously, lots of trips to libraries and lots of letters written to academic. Yeah. Whereas now it's like you can just go online and find a resource in so many different places, and people's family memories or people's actual memories of the war, like my mother and my family's memories, I can weave those things in, the phrases that people use. And I'm forever on secondhand book things, and there's a biography of Gracie Fields or Jessie Matthews, and I think, well, I'll have that one because they were alive in the war, they were lived experience. And I'm always careful, because when it's somebody's memoir or biography, obviously they want to show the best side of them. So you have to be careful of that, but I do find them so inspirational. And then you can get clips. And it's not just show business and theatre clips, but you can get clips of people, old films.
I use that a lot. YouTube has a lot of. I'm doing Land Girls at the moment in my 4th book, and I wanted to know what actually happened when they harvested if they were not using a tractor. I've got a friend who's a farmer, so he was able to help me out with some of that. And then actually just watch these films as a girl, and until I found out the difference between a stook and a stave, which I wasn't sure. But it's just amazing. I didn't know you could get them. So I've got actual DVDs of real film clips, but I didn't know you could go onto. I've never used YouTube. So that's a resource I've found, and that seems to be infinite, really. There's just so much on there. But these films, and they're free, a lot of them. You can get these clips.
Yeah. Do you use YouTube a lot, Erin, for documentary films? And
Yes, absolutely. And just there's newsreel clips you can find too, which is phenomenal. With this, it's been interesting too, because there's the Soviet propaganda aspect. So you can get a lot of interesting information, but you have to, obviously realize that it's propaganda, but it's interesting to see how they spun it and how they were portraying it to the world. So yeah, YouTube is a phenomenal resource. I'm a huge fan of it.
It is, especially the old Pathé News, where you get the actual clips. But again, you have to, with the benefit of hindsight, we can stand back and we can look at those films and see that they were propaganda, or that they were showing a certain slant on the situation. I find people, because people were able to self-publish years ago, not many books, but I really enjoy finding books about people that it was the lived experience. Not necessarily a celebrity or anyone well known, but it's the ordinary person.
They're the ones I use.
History.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is quite difficult, I always think, because it would only be educated people that would be able to give their experience.
True.
Well, a lot of books I've got have got autobiographical things from land girls that I'm using, but somebody's obviously gone in and spoken to them, because there's hundreds in there. So, but have you had the thing I've just, where you read a book you think is, it's genuine, the person was there, and take the information from that, and then 3 books later, after you've written this and the book's gone, you find another book with some completely different version of what happened, and then you think, oh my goodness, what? And that has happened to me sort of with Manston, about the structure of Manston, but I don't think any of my readers are going to care about the width of the runway at a certain year, but I was really upset when I found out the original, and this was an RAF person who was based there, had actually got it wrong.
I think it's memory, isn't it? My husband, during the lockdown, he decided to write his biography, and I edited it, and I was saying, but it didn't happen like that. And in his memory, and that's why I think you've got to be really careful, because people's memory is only their memory.
Right? Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be the exact truth. It's just what they remember the truth to be. So that's quite an interesting thing that you have to consider so many things, don't you?
Yes, I found that a lot in interviewing my great uncle and my grandfather, and they'll have different memories of the same story. And I find myself, that's when you really start to research and say, okay, well, I need to pick out the grains of truth and take it all with a grain of salt as well, because you just, it's memory. It's always.
Well, I found I talked to my brother, who's a bit older than me, and about things, and he doesn't remember some things at all that I remember, but I think men perhaps don't remember childhood things, but equally I don't remember some of the things that he does, and yet we were both there. It's obviously your perception of the things at the time, how much impression, but it tends to be, it's exactly the same, I suppose, with our autobiographies that we read. But sometimes if you read a book, a biography, or just a research book, you're not necessarily getting it authentic. It's, again, can be politically skewed, or you've got to be it's very careful.
Which is fascinating in itself, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, even to discover more as well. Like when I first started writing this book, it was probably 10 or 11 years ago. And in 2018, they did a whole new study with demographers from Ukraine, trying to really find out the true death toll, because it was covered up. And, they covered it all up so nobody could find out. They eliminated the census. They did, Stalin did all these things to hide it from the world. And so the death toll was widely varied depending on who you asked. And so when they did this most recent study, a lot of the information had to be adjusted. And so I had to go back and kind of read. And fortunately, it hadn't published yet. So I think readjust.
I'm stuck with my extra wide runway because the book had already gone out when I discovered. But I'm hoping that none of my readers will worry too much about, and the people who do know when the runway was made wider are probably not alive now.
Yeah.
I would think, or very likely, so old they don't care.
Fenella, is there a particular time period you really enjoy writing about? Because you said earlier that you wrote Regency and you're writing World War II. So is there a preference?
I started with Regency because that's what I always thought I would be, a Regency writer. And that's when my first books published were Regency. I had about 26, 27 Regencies published. And then self-publishing became possible on Kindle. And so I had such a huge backlist. I thought, well, I'll do that. And then I wrote 4 Victorian sagas, and I really enjoyed writing those set locally. And I would love to write some more of those, but I'm now contracted to write World War II, so that's what I shall write. And I've now given up writing Regencies because I was writing 7 books a year, and that's just, I mean, the Regencies are short and they don't require any research, because once you've written, so it's a sort of a genre, isn't it? They're sort of a Jane Austen-y kind of things, but it's only a period of about 15 years, so there's not a lot. Once you know it, you know it. But I'm now just going to concentrate on World War II because I do love writing them.
Erin, your next book, will it be a dual timeline?
No, I think it's going to be a straight timeline for the next one.
Yeah. And do you think that you'll keep your work so it always features Ukraine, or would you like to explore other sort of periods?
No, I think I'll eventually branch out. I love having a connection to where I'm writing about, whether it's
yes,
family or a place I've felt close to. So I think I'll always have some element of that in my writing. But the next book's Ukraine for sure. I'm not quite sure for book 3. I have a couple ideas I need to work with my editor on, so we'll see.
And will that need a lot of research, or will you sort of be contemporary with those, do you think?
The future ones? No, I think I'll always stay historical. I really enjoy delving into that history and finding out more about another place and time.
Yeah, I enjoy the research part of it, and I feel it's like, oh, this is the best part. It's like a luxury to think.
You can spend too long doing it, can't you?
Yeah, but it's a luxury to sit and read these fascinating books, and you can think, well, it's work. And and I enjoyed watching old movies on Talking Pictures TV channel, because there'd be old films that were, I particularly look for ones that were made in the late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah.
Because I would be watching the background and watching what people said. So you would get the clothes, what things are in use, and also phrases and common sayings that people would say that are not in fashion anymore. So you can get the language right. So I could spend all afternoon watching a nice old Arthur Askey film, and it was work.
Yes.
But yes, Fenella, you're right. It can be a rabbit hole, can't it?
I've become so much older than both of you. I remember not quite being, when I was young, there was still rationing. And obviously the things that, who was I talking to? My neighbour, who's a couple of years older than me. We're talking about bag wash. And if I say bag wash, that doesn't mean anything. Does it mean anything to either of you?
Yes.
And probably not to you, Erin.
No.
But there was
laundromat. Would it be the laundromat? The laundrette?
No, that bag wash wasn't a laundrette, wasn't anything. It was somebody, that was before laundrettes. People didn't have washing machines, and you had a copper which you boiled up if you were, if you had a house. But we lived in you would call an apartment, we call a flat. And I remember when I was a child that all of the clothes went into this great big sort of canvas bag, which was called a bag wash, and it went off to the laundry. Somebody came and collected it, and it came back, and it was just mangled. Mangle, sort of.
Yeah.
And it wasn't spun dry, because they didn't have them then. Well, not in England. I'm sure you had them in America, but we didn't have them. And it then was dripped on you whilst you're eating your breakfast, because you all these wraps over things. And that I just remember, the bag wash is just something with my brother and said, oh my God, heavens, it's bag wash day, stay out of the kitchen. But it's nice, I was talking to Margaret and she remembers, oh yeah, I remember the bag wash. And then she told me a wonderful story about her grandma, who was very small, and a bomb dropped on her house, and the piano was blown backwards, and it was at an angle, and she was found incredibly cross in that little gap between the piano and the wall, and she was perfectly all right. And
the piano saved her.
The piano, yeah, because it's so big, but the house had virtually gone. And I wish I'd asked my father and stepfather things about, their experiences as RAF pilots. But of course, back then, I didn't know I was going to want to know.
Right. No. Erin, did you talk to your grandmother a lot about life in Ukraine? And
so she told a lot of family stories, and we did a lot of the cultural things. I cooked with her, and I spent a lot of time with her. So a lot of the experiences I had with her, I used for my book in the contemporary timeline for the little girl with the grandmother in that story. But no, there's so many things I wish I would have asked her. I was young when she passed away, and now looking back, I would give anything to have a conversation.
That's it, isn't it?
Yeah, hindsight. You just didn't. I wasn't old enough to realize. But.
No.
There are still a few living resources, but I've got a very good friend whose husband's 96, and he was went out to India, and he was there in partition. I mean, not that I'm in it. I can't see that's going to come into any of my books, but that's just fascinating. Hearing, he actually remembers, the bodies floating down the Ganges, and stories about you had to put a tin plate over your meal when you went to the mess to get it, because when you were crossing from where the sort of mess was to where you ate it, these big hawks would come down and take your dinner. And the new people who came from England, if nobody told them, never got anything, didn't get anything to eat the first few times, because a bit like we have seagulls, don't we?
Yes.
Bombing the fish and chips. I don't know what you have in the States, but no doubt you have big birds that do the same.
I've had seagulls do that on the coast when we visited.
Yeah, that's it. So, but he still, remembers, but he wasn't, he went in the war later. But then there can't be many people left who you can actually ask now.
No. Erin, I'm sure viewers will be fascinated, as I am, by that embroidery over your shoulder. It's could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes, my great grandmother embroidered a lot. She had a big, beautiful box of threads that she would use all the time, and so she made that. And it's Ukrainian trident, or the trizbub. It's the state symbol of Ukraine, and so she made that after she came to America. So whenever I look at that, I think how much that her country still meant to her, even though she had to leave as a refugee. And she passed away a month before Ukraine declared its independence in 1991. So I think about that a lot. Like, she missed seeing that finally after all those years. So this embroidery means a lot to me, and all the symbolism in it, and family and just culturally. So
does it inspire you? Do you have it where you write? Is it there? So it's in your eyelid? Yes.
Yes, I do. I keep it right by my computer.
Yes, because I'm inspired by my grandmother's stories. And when I was a little girl, I was always asking her things about life in the 30s, the 20s and 30s. And that's inspired the next series that'll come along. But I often think you never ask your parents, because they're always busy, earning a living and everything. But it's the grandparents that hold the history and tell the stories. So it's interesting that as a little girl, she still did pass on all that information. That is, and you only need the seed of the inspiration, because we can find the other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And Fenella, what inspired you to go in the saga period and the World War II period? Anything in particular?
Well, I think what did I start with? Well, I was back in the day, it seems like a long time ago, I had an agent, and she said, if you write something World War II saga-ish, she said, I think I can place it for you. You know how they do. And so, I hadn't really thought about, so I did, but she didn't. So, but I just carried on and wrote. I enjoyed it. And in fact, I've written 5 books in one season. And those books, I think there's 9, I think, that I indie published. And their first one was 2012, so it's a long time ago. And they're still still selling and still making me a lot of money. So that's the beauty, isn't it, of the internet and of Kindle and things, that your books go on forever, don't they?
Yes, it's much more accessible, isn't it?
Yeah, rather than paperback books. Usually, they expect you to have like a 3-week shelf life, it used to be. And then after that, if they're not sold, you're moved on and the next lot. But since the advent of digital copies, they can go on, and audio copies and things, they can go on as long as a new lot of readers come along and want them.
Erin, this is your debut. Had you already written a book before? You know, had you had this idea of book for a long time? Had you always had this burning urge to write this particular story? Because the timing is very poignant, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I've always wanted to write. I've always wanted to be a writer. But this story I started in, I think it was 2011 or 2010 or 2011. So, but I had young children. So it was little bits of writing between naps and late times. So it went through so many different edits and changes, and I, rewrote half of it and found more information and went back and fixed it. So this book has been my baby for a very long time. So now writing book 2 and kind of having like, all right, I kind of have deadlines and I have to,
it's a bit different, isn't it?
Very different experience. Yeah. But it feels more real in a way, because I have a goal and I have a finite goal to get to. So I kind of like that part as well.
We've got some questions coming in, and there's a question from Mandy who says, do you feel pressure to write, or do you enjoy the process even if you have a deadline? Which is quite, to follow on from what you're saying, Erin, that it took you a long time to write the first one. So the second one, are you finding that easier or more difficult?
I think it's both. If there's a bit of pressure, of course, there's always going to be a bit of pressure, but knowing that I have, it's a goal that's easier for me to look to and work towards. Whereas before it was kind of a pipe dream, like, will this ever happen? I don't know, but I enjoy doing it. Now it's like, I made this first one happen, I can make the second one happen. So I feel a bit more driven in that regard.
Yes. What about you, Fenella? What keeps you? Because
I am
a year.
I'm a writer. I've always intended to be a writer, and I wrote, I think, 6 books. They were contemporary, which I didn't send to anybody or do anything with. I was a teacher then, in between school holidays, and I was determined I would one day be a writer. And I was saying to someone, I just wish it had happened sort of 15 years earlier, so I had got more time to enjoy being successful. And I mean, up to a point now that I'd like to have been 20 years ago, but
but it's all timing, isn't it? Because I wish I'd written I always told my grandmother, she used to say to me, somebody should write these stories down or they'll be lost forever. And she's right, and we should pay attention to the older generation and try and gather as much as we can to save it. But then I think, well, I wasn't the person then to be able to write the story that particular way. So I think it's all timing, isn't it? Because Erin, if you'd written your book 10 years ago, it wouldn't be as poignant and important as it is now, to show people that history repeats itself.
It's really surreal when I think about that, how long I worked on it, and for it to come out now, it's mind-boggling.
So it's a lot to do with timing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But do you set yourself a goal with your writing, Tracy? I mean, I have to write 1,500 words every day of every week in order to meet my deadlines.
And how many books do you write a year?
I'm now writing 4 a year for Boldwood. But you think, if you write 1,500 words a day, that's not a huge amount.
No, and I do have a goal.
I don't. You see, I'm a widow. I'm on my own. I've just got a cat, and I see family. I get up about 5:30, and I write all morning, and then I've got the afternoons to go and do things if I want to. But it's. I wouldn't. It would be very difficult to do it if I didn't enjoy it, I must say. But I do. I love to write. It's what gets me up in the morning. But I don't plan. Do you all plan? Do you all write meticulous plans?
I do plan. I have to know where I'm going. To know where I'm beginning, where I'm ending, and then you can know that in your head, but you don't actually. Do you write a lot down before you? Oh yeah. I do sort of write. What I do is I have an idea of a character. So when I was writing The Variety Girls, I had the character of Jessie Delaney. I called her something else entirely. But I could see her, and what I do is I go on the internet and I find lots of pictures of. So I'll go on like images of Downton Abbey or images of some old series, and I'll look for characters, and then I print them off and stick them on my notice board.
I know people who do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I give them a name, and once I'd got the name of Jessie Delaney, I could see her, and then it was just sort of staying with her, following her. But I had a sort of a plan of, she's going to do this and she's going to go there, and there's going to be people in the variety show, and I had to think about what was the book about. It was a choice between staying where she was with a boyfriend or taking a chance. And then obviously then there's lots of conflict and tension because won't she achieve a dream? So I do plan, but I don't plan meticulously. But I found that when I was writing the second book, because I had like a synopsis plan, when I panicked,
you could go back and look at it.
Think, oh yeah, I know where I'm going. So it helps stop the panic.
I hope if you're writing a series that you have a book in which you write down every single character's name and the time, because I've got this, and every time, even if it's just the gardener or it's something, so I can look back and think, who was the lady from the village? What was her name? Oh, Aggie, right? So because if they appear in other books, you've got to make sure you have the right name. Well, that's the only writing I do. I plan it all in my head.
But gosh, wish I could. What do you do, Erin?
I'm more like you, Tracy. I have to have an idea, especially with the historical beats. Like I like to write down what's happening chronologically in history, and then I'll kind of put my character there just so I know I'm not missing any big events or that I'm touching where I want to touch historically, and then I fit the characters that. But I have to know where I'm ending up.
I think
midpoint and all that.
I did when I first started. I've still got the books. I did chapter by chapter, but I think as you write more books, you do less planning. But I'm I suppose what you call an instinctive or an organic writer. So I'll sit down, and if the words don't, because I dictate, you see, I couldn't write as many books if I typed. I use Dragon software. But if the words don't come, I just go away and go back later, because I don't know where it comes from. And I think, well, how am I going to? And suddenly I know that this can work because something's going to happen, and I don't know before I start.
No, I find I'm
just lucky that's how my brain works.
If I grind to a halt, I go and walk the dog, or I go and do something totally different, and usually walking the dog will resolve the problem.
Yeah, so your subconscious works on it so much sometimes when you're not trying to think about it, I find, for me.
Yeah. Is there anything in your research, Erin, that you found that surprised you or shocked you, or something that was totally unexpected?
Yeah. So for the Holodomor, I'd have to say there was two things that really stuck out to me. The things people were eating to survive shocked me. Like, people were so desperate, they were flushing out vermin burrows to get little bits of grain that had been hidden there, just to eat that tiny bit. That's how desperate they were. And, grinding tree bark into flour. So that was hard to read and see.
Shoe leather, didn't they? I remember that some places they stewed up old shoes, didn't they?
Yes, they would boil old leather.
Something to chew,
Yeah. So those things were shocking, and then also the specific directives towards just Ukraine that Stalin implemented to really just bring down the Ukraine as a whole was pretty shocking to look at. How he closed the borders to the country so no one could escape. The villages were locked down, so no food could come in. The people going into houses and ramming metal rods through beds and tearing apart chimneys just to see if they could find hidden food in clothing or bedding. And just reading that was shocking and horrifying.
It must be.
How much do you know how to put in your book? Because with a saga, you want people to suffer, but there's got to have that uplifting sort of positive momentum forward. So how much do you feel that you can put in the book and still keep that overall tone?
That's a hard balance, and I think I tend to skew towards putting in too much. And my editor Tara was really helpful in saying, this is great, but we also have to have a bit of that hope, because there's always love and hope in humanity, and that's what you want as a person, is what you hope for, and as a reader, that's what you want too. But I also didn't want to do a disservice to the suffering people went through. I do think it's important to show that as well, as much as you can. without turning off your reader because it's just too hard to read.
But the thing is, there's a sort of like almost a subgenre of his World War II saga books, which are the sort of I don't read them, the sort of the graphic books, you know, the Auschwitz and the, you know, concentration camps and like the boy in the striped pajamas and things like that. I mean, I don't read them because I find them too upsetting. But there are people who actually want to know, and that's fine. You know, you people read what they want. But so I think if that's the kind of thing you're writing about, something that happened to your family, something is personal, and you've got to be true to yourself and not sugarcoat it. I mean, obviously you put in a hopeful thread, but your book is obviously going to be hard hitting because that's what it is, isn't it? You can't make it all sweetness.
It is about survival, isn't it? It's about, you know, sagas are about people having tough times, but ultimately getting through them. Right. Because I think we read that because it gives us hope when we're struggling through our bad times. Because what keeps me going, if I've got a deadline or the words won't come, I just think this is nothing compared to what my grandmother had to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think stop whinging.
Yeah,
write a few hundred words because I feel very privileged.
The thing is, I'm not sure you see this. Sorry, that's the cat's just fallen off a chair. Sorry, age 10 years then. But I'm not sure. I mean, whether the definition of saga, if you read it, people will say a saga is about people suffering hardship. And overcoming it through hope and resilience and tough women. And my Victorian sagas were about people, you know, in slums and things who overcame. But they're the only real sagas I've written. I think mine are about a lot of people, and there are unpleasant things happen. But it's not. The hardships are the same hardships everybody, you know, to do with bombs and, you know, people dying. But they're not sort of the gritty reality of that you might get if, I mean, a friend of mine, Jean Fullerton, writes, you know, one set in the East End. Well, they're sagas because they're, you know, obviously their life was tough. The people living in the East End, they got the brunt of it, didn't they?
It did.
So, but I mean, I never quite know whether, I mean, mine, not jolly, I mean, but there's a lot of humour in them. That there is always a love story, or usually a love story of some sorts in it, but it's not a tough, resilient woman fighting all the odds, because Joanna, who is featured in all of them, she's a lady, she's an aristocrat.
But it's stepping out of your normal life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being uncomfortable. I thought I'd lighten it up a little bit, not keep it grim. There's a question in from Nina that says, what books, if any, do you like to read for leisure when you are writing? So do you read for leisure when you're writing, or do you steer clear?
I steer clear of World War II. I've got a book, Jean's latest book she sent me, and I won't read that until I've finished writing this one. For two reasons. One, because they're so good, I will stop writing until I've finished it. And two, you know, I sometimes feel by osmosis, you know, there's a danger you might pick up something that you inadvertently gets absorbed into you and comes out in your book. So I'm always very careful. So if I read Bernard Cornwell, or anything he writes. I read Lee Child, Michael Connolly. So I read sort of American thrillers, really.
Oh, right. What do you read, Erin?
When I'm in the midst of writing, because these topics are so heavy, I like to read something completely different. I do a lot of rom-coms just to get out of my head and escape from it all.
Yeah. But they're all written in first person present, and I just can't deal with it. I can't write that, and I can't read it. So I know a lot of friends who write, and I know they're good, and I can read about 3 or 4 chapters, and then I think I know this is good, but I just can't. You know, he is sitting on there and he is brushing his hair, and I just can't get on with it. So contemporary is really out for me. So it has to be historical, but I don't read in the same whatever. If I'm writing a Regency, then I wouldn't read a Regency.
No, I don't read any sagas while I'm writing a saga, because the same thing, you get too wrapped up in it and it confuses my brain. So, and usually when if I'm writing the Variety Girls, I tend to read showbiz autobiographies, because
I do a lot of
like it's
research
helping
reading.
what I'm
Yeah,
writing,
yeah.
And then to totally have a break, I'll just read anything. So I think the last book I read was a Beryl Bainbridge, and I'll just read whatever. I've got lots of books on my shelves that I think I'll read that one day. So I try and think.
But I tend not to, when I'm working, I mean, I tend not to read a lot when I'm writing, because I'm spending so many hours in front of us. Because, I mean, if I'm writing 1,500, 2,000 words, I then go back and edit it before I finish. And then I'm also doing all the social media and anything else, then you've got edits coming in, or proofreading, or something coming back from, for the previous book or the next book. And so I tend to just watch mindless television, mostly American programs, I must say. So I like all the Chicago Med, Chicago. Do you watch any of those?
I watch Chicago Fire.
Yes, Chicago Fire. I just love your fire engines. There are 3 programs which have got got huge fire engines in it, and I'm just absolutely besotted. The people are nice as well, but I just love those great big fire engines. I think.
This one ties in then. So if you could imagine your books being made into films, who would be in them? This is a question from Judy.
Who would be in my? I don't know people's names.
What, any old movie stars that you? Because I think of old movie stars.
My favourite actor is Sean Bean. I could watch him reading. I mean, that's from Richard Sharp. I don't know if you had that, Erin, in America. There's a series of Bernard Cornwell books, which was very popular about 20 years ago, and all my Regency heroes are sort of him, with either blonde, red, black hair, just depending, but they're basically him. But so that would be very easy for a Regency, but for the World War II, I don't know. I mean, I don't anybody really.
If yours were made into a film, Erin, can you think of anyone?
No, I'm really not good at that. I've been asked that before, and they just look so different in my head from anybody I really see in the movies. So maybe.
The thing is, when you see people, they quite often. I mean, there are some really good actors. I mean, Sean Bean's one of them. But a lot of people you see them when they're being sort of in social events, and when they're actually being somebody on screen, they're totally different. I sort of think, hang on, is that something? You kind of look, is that Hugh Grant just did
Disappointment.
A film. And I didn't know it was him, but I recognised his voice, but I couldn't tell it was him from his acting or his appearance. So really, it doesn't matter who we choose, because if they made a film, they'd find somebody, and that person would then become.
Yes, because as I say, I find photographs. So I've got a picture of my character Harry, and he's Eddie Redmayne, but Eddie Redmayne when he was young, when he was like in his early 20s.
Which one is Eddie Redmayne? Is he the one who was in the one of the Stranger Fantastic Beasts or something? Or is that?
Yes.
I do know who you are then. Yeah.
So I've got a picture of him maybe when he was about 22. Which is the similar age of my character. So in my head, that's the sort of persona he has. But of course, if they made it into a film, he's too old. And I have a picture of Sam Neill, and he's Jack, who owns the theatre. So I pick certain characters. I've even got Sean Bean for Nella.
Have you? Oh, good.
So he's only playing one character though. But I was looking for a rugged fisherman type, and I found a picture of Sean Bean with a cream sweater, a nice fisherman's sweater. So
absolutely,
he would be in my films. And there's another question from Helen. TV has made readers armchair experts. How do authors create fresh scenarios that will entertain but also meet knowledge expectations? That's quite interesting about being an armchair expert.
Well, the thing is, that's why as historical writers we're perfectionists when it comes to research.
Yes.
Because we know people are reading with, looking for, or not quite looking for mistakes, but they want an authentic, as we said before, an authentic experience, don't they? So that's the way we deal with it, is by making sure our research is right. And everything I put in, obviously not the sort of romantic scenes, but all the actual events I put in, the plane crashes, they've all happened to somebody, not all to the same person, the unfortunate hero in my book, who might have several other people's experience, but they've all come from autobiographies so I know that these things have happened. And I think as long as you work like that, you know, nobody's going to say that we've not given them something that is true.
Yeah, I agree. I try to do the same thing.
Yeah. And see, of course, if you're using family stories, I mean, then you know it's authentic because you've got it directly from somebody who was there.
Yeah, for book 2, it'll be that way. For book 1, it's a lot more pulled from other people's just, you know, general experiences that I read about, interviews and stuff. But yeah, definitely, I like to use what I've seen happen.
Yeah, that's.
I've just had a message that we've got 5 minutes to go, and there's a question for Erin.
Isn't it?
It has gone quickly. A question for Erin: was the crime hinted at by Russia and based on truth?
Yes. So that, yeah, I guess I can't get into that too much without spoilers, but yes, that happened a lot, and they're referring to cannibalism, and that did happen during the Holodomor. That happened, and it happened a lot with people who had passed away, and sometimes they would eat people after they had already passed. It was never accepted. It was never okay that people were arrested for it. It never became a cultural norm or anything. It was still horrifying, but that's how desperate some people were. And there were instances of people who went crazy and would kidnap people or children and unfortunately, eat them. So
well, people in desperate situations, people do desperate things. It's almost impossible, isn't it, to put ourselves in that kind of situation.
We don't know what we do.
Right.
I mean, you think if it's your children. I mean, I can remember when my husband finished university, we've got 2 small children. He held a party, and of course, word got round, and there was the house was full of people, and I'd never seen them. I went up, and somebody was a woman who went into my children's room, and I physically got hold of her and pushed her down the stairs. The party ended pretty quickly after that. But I'm not a violent person.
Right. No, you felt violent.
It was like an instinct, you know, that this drugged up woman was leaning over the cot of my son. No, I'm not having that. And so I do know only from that one thing that you will do the most extraordinary and unlikely things if your family is threatened.
Yes, absolutely.
It's useful as a writer because you have to feel that experience of what would I do in that situation. You know, if somebody pushed me to my limits, what would I be capable of?
Yeah.
So I'm going to finish on a really nice question because we've only got a few minutes left, and it's from Mandy again. Do you visualize ever retiring from writing, or will you be holding a pen when you draw your last breath? Vanilla. I can imagine the answer.
When I was given this 8-book contract, I did say to Caroline, you know, I might fall off my perch before I finish those, and she laughed. She said, "No, you'll be writing a lot longer than that." But I mean, yeah, I'll be writing until I'm not able to.
And Erin.
Yeah, I think so. I'd love to have a very long career. It makes me happy to do it. So I want to do it as long as
you're just starting. So I really envy you. I wish I was your age again and could be starting again.
Well, I admire all your books you've done. It's amazing.
Well, I mean, I'm a fast writer, and somebody actually made the mistake of saying to me, "Oh, you churn your books out," and my hair stood on end. You know, he told, "We don't churn books."
No, you can't really if you write historical because there's so much research to do. It's impossible.
I don't know. In my desk, I've got, well, good thing you can't see beside my desk. I've got about 12 books, all at various, you know, open at various pages, books with Post-its all in a heap, which I keep referring to as I'm writing, as well as all of my bookmarks and everything else. I mean, it is very intensive and time consuming, but it's the joy of historical writing, isn't it?
I think it is. You know, my favourite subjects at school were English and history.
Yeah, I did history and English at college. Yeah,
me too.
Did you? Yeah, well, did you, Tracy?
No, I didn't. But I always remember that when I was a small child, the things I liked were stories, whether they were written down or whether people were telling me stories. And I'm still exactly the same. And I still find the ordinary person's history, you know, the ordinary person's story fascinating. I think when you watch things like Who Do You Think You Are,
Yeah.
It might be a celebrity, but they go back and it's the ordinary person.
Act back in the past. Yeah.
Yes, and I just find that fascinating that people can overcome such hardships. And I just find that absolutely fascinating that people smile and they'll have a sense of humor and we'll all laugh, but that's what helps you cope with all the bad things.
Yes.
I think that a sense of humor is imperative. And I think even in the most desperate situation, people will still find humor or love or a sense of being together. I don't think it makes us all animals.
One of the most, I think, moving moments when the Ukraine war, the current one, started, was that little girl who stood up in that cellar with all those people and just sung, and it made me cry. It was just, it was just so wonderful, and she brought such joy not to the people in there and to all the people who watched. I mean, it was, and those moments there's always some moments like that, aren't there? Even in the most dire circumstances. Hopefully there's always that moment of joy. I think that's a lovely place to end, Fenella.
Yes,
so thank you, Erin and Fenella, for joining us today. I've really, really enjoyed it. It's so nice to talk to other writers and find out their different methods. And I've got 2 more books on my to be read pile now. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for hosting it. Thank you. Lovely to meet you, Erin.
Lovely to meet you all.
Okay, bye.